Following amendment, clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Turner of Harris.
The amendment is withdrawn. Following amendment, the clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Menéndez.
Chair recognizes Representative Menéndez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment is hopefully an amendment that really will not be necessary. And the reason I explain it this way is because in the bill as drafted, there is a 1-year implementation grace period for these clinics to get up to the ambulatory surgical center standards. And so through the many hours of debate and testimony that we've had on this bill, I've heard both from the author and its proponents that the reason that we have House Bill 2 is because we're trying to improve women's health that are going through or making these decisions. And so my concern is that just like the bill has a safety net, and the bill's safety net is that if any part of the bill is found unconstitutional, that that part be severed from the bill and that the rest of the bill continue. Well, I'd like to add a safety net for the people that are going to be affected by this bill. For the women who live in rural parts of Texas, whether it be the Valley or it be El Paso or wherever, any part of Texas, where there currently is a women's health clinic where she can receive a health screening, a mammogram that's affordable, a cervical cancer exam, whether she can find out if she is pregnant in the first place or not, whether she may actually go for an abortion. If the bill, after 1 year, actually closes the clinic that is close to her, I would like the state to help provide for her ability to be reimbursed for those costs. And so the author of the bill says that this is not intended to further restrict or even eliminate the ability of thousands of Texas women to seek the medical health care. But if for whatever reason it actually does, then I think the state needs to step in, because we are putting an undue burden on women, particularly in rural areas of our state. How currently, let's say in El Paso, there's one clinic. If that clinic were to close, we are expecting a woman to drive or fly the 600 miles at her own expense because she will have no other place to go. So I think that hopefully the author of the bill will see that this amendment would only apply if those clinics actually close. And so hopefully we have nothing to worry about, because I've heard that this bill will not close clinics. And if that's the case, then this reimbursement will not be necessary. But if it does actually close clinics, then those women deserve the right. And the reason that we have 30 miles is that's the same distance that the bill provides that a doctor must have access within 30 miles of a hospital, can be no further. So we use that same 30-mile distance that our constituents have to be no further from a clinic in order to provide or receive the services, or that the state should step in and help them if we really do not want to cause a new undue burden on these women that really otherwise receive no health benefits or health screenings or medical care or contraception, because I think in many cases, just like as it was said earlier, none of us here are pro-abortion. What we like to see is that women have the ability to receive health care, and in many cases that means prevention of an abortion by prevention of a pregnancy. And so in many cases in rural Texas, there may be a situation where a woman might have 5 or 6 children already, and maybe she has an abusive husband who will not use contraception, and this clinic may be the only place where she can avail herself of an ability to prevent an abortion, to prevent an unwanted pregnancy that would possibly end in an abortion. So members, I think that this is a common sense safety net for our constituents, for all of our constituents, that if the state really believes that we will not close any of these clinics, that then we shall not create new undue burdens or any harm to our constituents, that we're going to step in and say, if we've taken away your only place where you can avail yourself of medical care, that we will help you provide that care. And with that, I would hope that the author would find this an amendment that she could accept. And I will yield for questions.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Farrar, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield?
Of course.
Gentleman yields.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're trying to do with this amendment is to take away some of the undue burdens that have been expressed in the discussion on this bill.
The attempt of this bill is a safety net for our constituents, because not all 26 million Texans live in Austin, Houston, San Antonio, or Dallas. For those people who currently are served by a clinic in a rural part or in El Paso or the Valley, if their clinic goes away, and we've been told that the intent of this bill is not to have clinics go away. So if the clinics do not close their doors, this bill won't be necessary.
Right.
But if the clinics cannot meet the new requirements, then we'd like to have a safety net. I'd like a safety net so that the women of Texas can somehow know that they don't have to paying the rent, paying for their kids' shoes, paying for things they have to pay above getting their medical care.
So in response to some of the constitutional concerns that have been raised, this would, and I'll note how narrowly tailored this is as well, but this would address some of those concerns if folks share that concern.
Well, exactly. I mean, the courts have been ruling that in some cases these undue burdens placed on women unnecessarily create problems for the courts. And quite honestly, I'm not a lawyer, and therefore my concern is not so much with what the legal case may be, but I do believe that the courts will look unfavorably on undue burdens. If we say in the Valley section of Texas there's 1 million people, and they're expected, of those million, maybe 500,000 are women, that they have to travel to San Antonio to receive the care that they used to get in a clinic and that closed because of this bill, because they couldn't meet the new standards, then we as a state should step up and say, it wasn't your fault that we passed the bill that took your clinic away.
You are aware that under this bill, there would be no facilities in existence south of I-10 and west of I-35. In other words, Lubbock, El Paso, McAllen, Corpus Christi, Luskin, those folks in those places would not have access.
It is my understanding that of the 47 or so clinics that exist today, 42, 47 clinics that exist today, that only 5 of them currently meet the requirements of the bill that is being proposed today. So if the bill goes into law, the rest of them will have 1 year to get up to the standard. And if in that year they cannot afford to meet those new standards, if they cannot afford to make the changes to become an ambulatory surgical center, then they will have to close their doors. So no one is saying, I'm not sitting here hypothetically saying they will close, they won't close. All I'm saying is, if they do close, and we take away the only place, the only clinic where someone in a rural community, whether it be Lubbock or El Paso or the Valley, wherever, then we as a state should say, we did this, and we need to step up and help you with your costs.
Right, so you created the problem and we're going to fix it just in case.
If this bill
Correct.
passes,
And this is a safety net. But if it doesn't have the effect then of closing these clinics, then there would be no need for this.
Absolutely. It is only a safety net for women who are too poor or don't have the financial resources to do this on their own. Because there are people who cannot. And there are people who this bill will never affect because they will just go wherever they can or to need to avail themselves of the services they want.
Right, and for those folks that think this would be something that people might take advantage of, I just want to note the language of your amendment. On line 15, it talks about an application, so you don't automatically get this, correct?
Oh, it's an application for reimbursement, and so it's not like you're getting paid ahead of time. Yeah.
Representative Stevens to raise point of order. Gentleman's time expired. Point of order is well taken.
Move adoption.
Chair recognizes Representative Laubenberg.
Mr. Speaker, I move to table this amendment in that, first of all, the abortion procedure is elective, and Representative Menéndez speaks that you don't have access in the rural communities. Well, right now, if I read to you, Abilene, the 42 abortion clinics that are in operation today are in Abilene, Austin, Bryan. Austin, Bryan, Corpus Christi, Dallas, El Paso, Fort Worth, Harlingen, Houston, Kylene, Lubbock, McAllen, Midland, San Angelo, San Antonio, San Marcos, Stafford, suburb of Houston, Waco, and Houston. Not one of these clinics that Representative Menéndez speaks of is in a rural community. But currently, under statute, the office of a physician, if he does less than 50 abortions a year, can provide abortion services to a client. So this amendment is not necessary, and I would move to table it.
Mr. Speaker. Simmons, for what purpose? Will the gentlelady yield for just one question?
Yes, I will.
Lady yields. Actually, it's a series, but it's really one big question. Ms. Lautenberg, is it true that there are about 75,000 abortions done in Texas in the most recent statistics for a year's time?
Yes.
Somewhere in that neighborhood? And I think I've heard several times that there's approximately 42 abortion clinics in Texas. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So if we did the simple math, that means if you just averaged them out, about 1,800 abortions are done per clinic. If you divide that out. Now, we understand some more done in some clinics than others, but on average, 1,800. And I don't know what the price is, but just doing some study just looking up some things, that the average abortion could be somewhere between the $500 to $1,000 range.
Yes.
So if we take those numbers even further, and so a clinic that does 1,800 abortions at, say, $750, that's about $1.5 million of revenue they're generating. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And it's the upgrades, well, I don't know exactly what they'll cost, but I think I've heard some numbers say that it'll be $100,000 or less. So is what some of the opponents are saying, or what Representative Menéndez might be saying, is that someone that has a $1.5 million revenue stream would not spend $100,000 in an upgrade facility to keep that $1.5 million?
Does it make sense?
I just can't imagine that. I mean, I don't know all the answers, and I'm not a lawyer, but I do know numbers, and it just seems like to me that if I have a revenue stream, I have to make an investment. I'm going to make that investment if the revenue stream generates it, and at $1.5 million, I can't imagine why these clinics would not do that. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I would absolutely agree. They're putting profit over the patient.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Gonzalez, for what purpose?
will the gentlelady yield?
I will.
Lady yields.
Representative Lautenberg, do you know how far El Paso is from Austin?
I don't know the exact mileage.
Well, around about, if this bill were to pass, there would be no abortion clinics in El Paso. One second. Meaning that a woman in my district would have to travel over 1,000 miles round trip to an abortion clinic. So my question is, understanding that there are going to be some geographical concerns when it comes to the implementation of this bill, why are you so against this amendment?
Representative Gonzalez, your statement that the abortion clinic in El Paso will close, and you just heard what Representative Simmons said, that they are not going to be forced to close, that they make a significant profit, and that they will have until September 2014 to upgrade their standards. And because of the distance in El Paso, I would think that they would want to provide a higher quality standard of care for the patient.
But this is saying in a hypothetical world that these clinics would do this. It potentially leaves at risk the women in my district, because if these abortion clinics do not do what this bill now requires, there will be a woman in my district will have to travel over 1,000 miles. And let me tell you, my district is one of the most low-income districts in the state. So Representative Menéndez's amendment supports the women in my district. Instead of going to Juarez, Mexico to get an abortion, that they could go to a safe facility here in Texas.
Representative Gonzalez,
Yes, ma'am.
you are speaking in hypotheticals, and there is nothing in this bill that will force the clinic in your city or El Paso.
But there's nothing in the bill that would force them to make these changes, thus could close down the clinics in my district. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Menéndez to close on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, basically what we've heard is that this amendment's not necessary because these clinics will make the upgrades. Well, then there's nothing to fear in the amendment. There should be no reason not to take it, because if it's not necessary, if it will never come into play, well then what is there to fear? So if the bill, you can put a severability clause in order to give it a safety net in case parts of the bill are found unconstitutional. Why can't we give people a safety net? Why can't we give our constituents, the women who may be adversely affected due to the undue burdens of a clinic closing, why can't we give them a safety net, even if you think it's not necessary? So with that, I would ask you to vote against the motion to the table, and I yield if there was a question.
Madam Speaker,
Yes, for what purpose?
will the gentleman
Of course.
Gentleman,
yield
yield.
for questions?
I do.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative, you're not an attorney.
Pardon me?
You are not an attorney?
I do not. I am not a lawyer.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you know this, but in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the United States Supreme Court said that the state may not put undue burdens on women being able to exercise their constitutionally protected right to have an abortion. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of that, yes.
Okay. Now, what part of the state do you represent?
San Antonio.
San Antonio? Have you traveled to the other parts of the state?
Absolutely. I've made the very long and tedious drive between here and El Paso, which is almost nothing but desert.
Now, you've heard advocates for hospitals say that if this bill goes in effect as is, that hospitals will not be willing to admit doctors who perform abortions externally into their hospital.
The representative from the Texas Hospital Association said that they could not see themselves giving the privileges because they would be concerned with the liability of what the doctor would be doing in their own clinic, so therefore they would not, they don't see the circumstances under which they would do that. And therefore, creating an undue burden that would probably make the bill, in my opinion, unconstitutional.
Okay. Now, advocates have said that this bill, as it is written, would cause clinics to shut down.
If those clinics cannot meet the new standards, they will have to close.
And the opposition says that no, it won't.
Well, you know, it's a hypothetical, and that's why I like this amendment, because whether they close or not, this amendment is there to protect the people that get affected.
But under the assumption that it does,
Okay?
that it would close some clinics, and the estimate for the people who are in the know said that only 5 clinics would remain in Texas. Is that your understanding?
Those are the 5 that currently meet the standards, yes.
Right. And one of them would be in San Antonio.
Correct.
Okay. And can you help me out a little bit? If someone had to drive from El Paso to San Antonio, how long is that drive?
Around 10 hours.
And if they have to drive back, it would be another 10 hours?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you've made that drive before.
I have.
How many times do you have to stop for gas?
It depends on what you're driving, but let's just say you have to stop for other purposes at least 2 or 3 times or 4 times. Yeah.
On just one leg.
Correct.
And there's a cost of gas, right?
Very expensive.
Nobody gets free gas around here.
Correct. There's no free gas.
Okay. And are you familiar with people who, let's say, live in the Valley, live in San Antonio, live in the rural parts of the Panhandle, who live in East Texas? Do you have a general idea of what their living conditions are like?
What their what?
General living conditions are like?
Well, I think it's common knowledge that along the border we still have places called colonias.
What are those?
A colonia is a substandard, almost third world country conditions in some cases where paved roads are starting to come in thanks to the work a lot of our hardworking legislators from the Valley who've been fighting hard, but places where people have found that the only place they could afford to live.
Are the people who live in colonias wealthy, middle income, or poor?
I think it's obvious that they're poor.
Okay. What about people who live in the rural parts of Texas who are farmers? Are they wealthy, middle income, or poor?
I think there's probably a little bit of everything, but predominance not wealthy or middle income probably.
Okay. Do you know how much a plane ticket costs flying from San Antonio to El Paso or to Panhandle?
I don't have a knowledge of that at firsthand, but I'm sure it's expensive.
Is it under $20?
Pardon me?
Is it under $20?
Of course not, no.
Is it under $100?
Probably not.
Okay. Would you say, given your knowledge of the people who live around the state, who are in poor areas, would having to travel long distances create a serious burden?
Well, absolutely. Not only is there the expense of the travel, but there is the time away from their job, if they can get the time off from their job. And so then there's the who will be taking care of if there are other children in the household. Who's going to take care of the children? So there's incredible burden put on anybody that will have their clinic closed and they'd have to travel long distance because it's the psychological as well as the mental, the physical, and the cost. So these burdens are multiplied a great deal.
And these clinics that exist now in the Valley, in the Panhandle, in El Paso area, in the rural areas of Texas, do they only provide abortions?
Of course not. I thought it was well-known fact that a very small percentage of the services provided by Planned Parenthood are actually abortions. It's also well documented that a lot of women's actual prenatal, a lot of their screenings for breast cancer, cervical cancer, for some women, Planned Parenthood and other services, clinics like these are the only place that can have affordable health care for their female needs. And so I think to me it's unconscionable that we would do anything to potentially close these clinics.
Would it be fair, now this statistic came out a couple of years ago, would it be fair to say that when there was a debate about this in earlier sessions, we found out that Planned Parenthood, only less than 3% of their actual services relate to anything related to abortion?
Correct, I recall that, yes.
So 97% of their services are for something completely different.
Exactly.
Including well woman exams.
Yes, and during the testimony in committee, we heard, there was one woman who testified that she had recently lost her job, and that if it weren't for Planned Parenthood, she would not have been able to get a free breast screening to identify the lumps in her chest because she had lost her job. And so this is not just about people who are chronically poor, but it's about everyday people who may lose their job, whose conditions may change suddenly, who need to have access to health care that may save their lives. And then in the end, let's say they don't have insurance and they have to present to the emergency room otherwise. If they don't get a screening early on, it's the taxpayers who pick up the much greater burden. So however you want to look at it, if you're not moved by the concern for the woman, you should also be moved by the fact that it would be, let's say, more conservative from a fiscal perspective to the taxpayers of Texas to keep these clinics open.
Absolutely. And earlier, Representative Laudenberg said that it was not her intent to close clinics. Do you remember that?
Yes, all throughout the debate, at the various, both here on the floor and in the two committee meetings I have heard, this is bill not intended to stop abortions or not intended to close clinics. That this bill is solely intended to help women achieve their health care needs. And therefore, this amendment solely rests with women who may otherwise not be able to afford to get to the clinic. That's all it does.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Giddings, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for some questions?
Of
Chief
course.
yield, the gentleman yields.
Of course.
Thank you. Chairman Menéndez, you and I serve on the State Affairs Committee. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And we heard a lot of testimony from those who represent state associations like the Texas Hospital Association,
Correct.
the Congress of OBGYN. During that hearing, I did not hear any of these.
Representative Stevenson raises a point of order. The gentleman's time has expired. The point of order is well taken and sustained. Representative Menéndez sends up an amendment. Representative Laubenberg moves to table. The question occurs on the motion to table. Vote aye, vote no. The clerk will ring the bell. So Representative Laubenberg voting aye, Representative Menéndez voting nay. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 93 ayes, 51 nays, the motion to table prevails. Chair recognizes Representative Guerin for an announcement.
Visitors in the gallery, once again, we're happy to have you here. We just let quite a few new visitors in. I just want to explain to you, we're happy to have you here. You need to stay in your seats and remain quiet. This means no yelling, no clapping, or any disturbance, or you will be removed. And if there's a large disturbance, we will clear the gallery. But as long as you're peaceful up there and quiet, we'd love to have you. Thank you.